well, it's actually society that just tells me I need to do this. I'm going to shift that guilt of like, that's wrong because we're both functioning adults. We can both contribute in different ways. I don't need to constantly take more on to prove that I'm a good mother.
Welcome to the Double Shift Podcast. I'm Dani Kagan, a serial entrepreneur and new mom. I'm obsessed with having unfiltered and inspiring conversations that redefine modern motherhood and celebrate high-performing, ambitious women. From launching a business with a newborn to navigating family life, we dive deep with thought leaders who defy expectations. No filters, some cursing, and pure inspiration to empower you to seize life, live more vulnerably, and reach for greatness together. Today is an exciting episode because I have not only one of the literal best psychotherapists here that I know of, but she's also one of my best friends. And I'm so excited to have this episode because we always have conversations about how hard motherhood is and working. And the reason why I literally started this podcast was because her and I were talking in my backyard one day. We were having such a great conversation. And I was like, we need to record this. And poof, the podcast was born. So major shout out to Leah Marks. And I'm going to introduce her really quickly. Leah is a social worker, psychotherapist who has a private practice in Toronto. She works as a therapist supporting people experiencing anxiety to manage stress and burnout, and also helps individuals recovering from childhood trauma. Oh my God, I feel like we're going to talk so much about childhood trauma right now, but I'm really excited. Okay. She's passionate about sharing mental health tips and resources, and also has an Etsy shop where she sells printable workbooks to help people reach their goals for personal growth and self-care. Hi, my bestie, Leah.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. I really appreciate it.
I feel like we have the best conversations. They're so raw, they're so honest, and it's time that we share it with the world. And candidly, Leah and I we were just talking before we hit record about how fucking tired we both are because we have toddlers who aren't sleeping right now. So bear with us. We're going to pump up the energy now.
Working mom life. We're just both showing up tired, but doing it anyways.
Exactly. Like we're just doing it anyways. I want to get right into the meat and potatoes. I think that one of the things that I struggle with, and I know that so many people in my circle of high-performing working moms struggle with so much, is creating and setting boundaries. It kind of feels like it's constant chaos, and I find it really difficult to create boundaries and then actually set them. So let's get into it. Tell me how we can do this better as working moms.
Absolutely. So it's such a tricky thing to do. And I think in reality, you can know what you want and need, but it's so hard sometimes to just say it or to say no. And so as we transition to being a mom, to being a working mom, there's, so much that is out of our control, so much that is completely unpredictable. As you said, so much just chaos. And so, learning to kind of set boundaries effectively in a way that feels really aligned with what you need can be such a helpful thing in taking back bits of that control, minimizing that chaos wherever you can. So I would say one of the first things that in terms of steps to setting boundaries, because you can kind of say like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to work overtime every night, as an example, or whatever it is, something that you really don't want to do. Often what trips us up is the worry about disappointing someone else. And so I'll really encourage people as a first step to kind of reflect on that piece of what is it about saying what you need that's kind of that roadblock or getting in the way. And I kind of have 4 steps that I recommend generally to people. first you need to kind of figure out what you feel, right? Of like, I'm feeling exhausted because of the working overtime, as an example. And when you're saying this to people, you want to say an I feel statement first. Or things like, I feel disrespected when you speak to me that way. Kind of stating it so that you are taking that accountability as well about how you're feeling.
I love that. I did that this morning where I said to my husband, Jordan, I was like, I feel annoyed that I am doing morning routine way more often than you are.
Exactly. And so we can, when we say something like that, we often go into that, right? Of like that kind of, I'm doing this, you're not doing that. Like, and the important thing to remember about setting boundaries is it's also stating what you need. So you could say, I'm feeling exhausted when I'm doing morning routine more than you're doing, right? And then so we've labeled the feeling, we said the action or behavior that someone else is doing. And a key piece here that I think is often missed is like expressing some understanding or empathy for the other person's position. Just like that idea of sandwiching feedback or things like that. When you acknowledge someone else's perspective, it can be a lot easier for them to take on what you're saying.
So funny because like we do this, I find that I do it really well when I'm in a business setting. I'm like, you're doing this great, but like I need you to do more of this. And then at home, I'm like, it's just chaos. And I'm like, we just need to be better. And instead of being like, let's treat this almost like a business setting so that we can like actually be collaborative. I think that's such helpful feedback.
Yeah, exactly. Because it is work, like parenting and, both parents working, we do put so much effort into our work, and it takes a lot of thought and planning and discussing and feedback and trial and error. But we kind of just expect home life to be like, okay, this is working and what's not working. And we can be snappy with our partners and everything. But if we take that same care to kind of be like, hang on a minute, like what's actually making me feel this way? What can I express to see my partner's point of view, as an example, and then stating what you actually need. And the conversations tend to go a lot better because you're getting to the root of the issue and less in that like blaming, I'm doing this, you're doing that, tit for tat.
Yeah, instead of pointing fingers. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great reminder. Okay, so those are the first couple steps. And then how do we actually get into the boundary setting?
So that's the stating your need part. And that's where you're going to state really clearly what you need and what will happen if you're not going to get what you need. That's within your control. So the key difference here is that you might say something like, if you're in an argument and, someone's speaking to you really rudely or whatnot, and you're feeling really uncomfortable, you can say, I'm going to need you to speak to me in a lower tone of voice, or I'm going to have to take a break from the discussion. So it's you're saying it's going to stop, but you're not saying you need to stop speaking to me that way, and not giving a consequence of what's going to happen. And the consequence of not getting the need met is something that's within your control. So I don't know if you've heard the controversy of Jonah Hill, the text, setting boundaries, all of that stuff.
Oh boy. I mean, like, we can get into it. Yeah. Tell me more. Let's talk about Jonah
if you
Hill
want.
Right now. Yeah.
I just bring it up because he was telling his girlfriend at the time what she needed to do as a way of expressing his own boundaries. And that's where the controversy is. When you're setting boundaries, you're saying, I need this. And if I don't get this, this is what I'm going to do. Not saying what he was saying to his partner is, if I don't get this, like, you need to stop posting pictures of yourself in bikinis. You need to stop doing that. So that's the difference.
We can learn from celebrities. They teach us lots of things when they fuck up and do stupid things.
Exactly.
So here we go.
Yeah. So it's your
Learn.
own boundaries, what you can do, what's within your control.
Yeah. And I think it's hard because it's really easy to point fingers and be like, you're doing this and you're doing that, instead of kind of turning inward and actually figuring out what you can control. It's really hard. Like,
yeah.
It's
and
not easy.
That's why I think that first step of really reflecting on how what's happening is impacting you and what you actually need to feel better. Because often we're just like, we jump to like, this doesn't feel good. I need this to stop. But reflecting on what is it about this pattern of the morning routine that's really making me feel exhausted? Is there a piece of it that's really getting to me that I could use a lot of help with, and ask for that? Instead of those blanket statements.
Yeah, exactly. And I did do that this morning. Like, I did say, like, it does start with a blanket statement for me. And like, I think this is really helpful to just actually take a step back and think about my needs before I even speak and have the conversation. But I did do the part where I'm like, okay, here are the things that I need help with in the morning. Like, I value my morning hours so much, because like that's like when my brain is really the best and it's when I can work. So I want to get my kid out the door. I want to get Ari out of the house and into daycare, because I have to do, generally speaking, I'm doing more of the pickups, and I like to pick up at a reasonable hour if I can. So when I shut my laptop at 4:30, like that's it. Whereas he can usually stay at work later and is, I guess, doesn't have the flexibility that I do as an entrepreneur. So, I said like, this is what I need, and here's why I need it, because my morning is so sacred. So I think that was helpful for him to understand.
That's amazing. And that's really getting to the core of like, what would make you feel better.
Thanks, Leah.
Okay. Good work.
Oh, thanks. Every day is a different fucking challenge. So today was good. But okay, so moving on from that now, I want to like understand, because let's actually take a step back, because I have a really big problem too with what you said right at the beginning, is like disappointing people to figure out your needs. Like, I'm either disappointing, well, quote unquote, disappointing my child who doesn't notice a difference when I pick her up late, or I'm disappointing someone by not seeing them, or bringing my child to see them that weekend because they haven't seen her in 2 weeks, or, like that let's tackle that disappointment aspect of it before we go on.
Yeah, it's so tough. So I think one of the things that comes up for me when I hear that, as you are describing, it feels like you can't win. Like, it feels like the guilt is going to come from either end, whatever you do, right? The motherhood guilt trap of like, well, if I prioritize this, I'm going to feel guilty that I picked up my kid late. Or if I prioritize picking her up, that means like I miss a really important meeting. Whatever it is, where you're constantly juggling really important things, and you feel guilt about disappointing someone on either end. And I think that tends to paralyze us, because it feels like there's no right decision, or there's no kind of best decision when you're always going to disappoint someone. And, that we can get into kind of childhood patterns that might come from. And that's something I would explore with people, in therapy, to understand kind of how you were responded to as a kid, when you may have disappointed someone and things like that, because we repeat those patterns, or we behave in ways out of fear of certain responses and that sort of thing. But practically speaking, one of the things I would say that's helped me a lot in this, because I definitely struggle with that too. And by the way, everything I say here are things I've struggled with as well. It's all easier said than done. No one's perfect. I have all the tools, and I like know cognitively sometimes what to do, and it's still hard for me. So just to give that caveat.
We are all human.
Exactly.
I've been saying this all week. We are human.
Yeah. Exactly. So I think one of the the pieces that has helped me a lot in dealing with that guilt or fear of disappointing people is that two seemingly opposite things can be true at the same time. And this is one of the concepts.
Say that again. Say it again.
Two seemingly opposite things can be true at the same time. And we've talked about this before. One of my favorite concepts from dialectical behavioral therapy, which is just this dialectics, that it can be really true that you love spending time with your toddler and, you light up when, as you posted the other day, like blowing bubbles, like these simple moments light you up. And it's also exhausting when you've been doing that for 4 or 5 hours and they won't go to bed. You're really annoyed with them. So you love them so much and you're really annoyed with them. And I think as moms in general, people have a hard time with this, but especially in motherhood, we have a really difficult time holding those things to be true at once. Same with working moms, right? Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was just I'm like, it's so true. And every time we talk about it, it's such a good reminder that I keep needing to hear over and over again, because I think there's also this stigma that it's you're kids and it's amazing. And look what you've created and you're so lucky. And I do feel grateful and lucky and all those amazing things. And I can also at the same time feel exhausted and tired and annoyed and frustrated. And it's okay. I think that there's and I'd love to get into this too, but even just with the toxic positivity around motherhood, and it's it's a lot. We're allowed to feel grateful and at the same time hold space for feeling really fucking tired.
100%. And if we give ourselves permission to do that more often, I think we would avoid a lot of that extra guilt that we carry around, if everyone was just okay saying what you just said, it would be pretty freeing to be yeah, everyone's actually feeling this way. But our minds kind of work that we need to categorize things. And so we feel we have to fit in this box of I think we were talking about this the other day of yeah, everything's going great. My kid's awesome. And when you hear people say that and you're struggling with certain things, it can kind of make you feel distressed, but both things can be true. You can fully feel that way about your kid and about motherhood. And it can be really hard and messy and crappy sometimes. So it's a tricky one to actually hold both of those things. But I remind people of that because I think that's important. And the other aspect I was just going to mention around that is around the work piece of, feeling like you're disappointing people at work or disappointing yourself because you're not maybe performing to the best of your ability or, performing the way you used to be in your role before having kids. So it can be good to kind of reflect on what things are both true now in this stage, right? Of I really value my job. I really value my home life and my kid and being a present parent. And it's okay to value both of those things at once. I don't have to value one more than the other. I don't have to make this decision or categorize. I can really value and feel that both things are really important.
Yeah, this week I did not perform because my daughter has been struggling to go to sleep all of a sudden. And so my plan yesterday was to get home and do a whole bedtime routine and then fire up the laptop and get a couple hours of work in. And I couldn't do that because I was trying to get her to bed for 2 hours. And so there was I had put so much pressure on myself being I didn't get what I intended to get done. It was just so much pressure on myself. And I feel how am I supposed to deal with that? If I'm working with you as a client, what are the tips you can give me to be how do I get through those moments?
Yeah, absolutely. I deal with the same thing all the time too. I think one of the most important aspects is that the way you're labeling it, right? Of like, I didn't get done what I wanted to get done because my child wouldn't go to bed for, and I didn't have that time. It's like a few different things that cause the distress. So it's sort of the change in plans. Most people don't like that lack of control, right? Some people are better at going with the flow than others, but that's a lot easier said than done. So best laid plans as a mother, right? It never really works out. So dealing with that lack of control, but how you're labeling that and how you're talking to yourself in those moments. So as a client, one of the first things I start to track is like, I would ask someone, what would it be like if I were a fly on the wall, kind of in your inner self talk? Like, what are you saying to yourself at those times? Last night when you didn't get that done, of like, oh, I didn't perform well again. I'm like not doing what I want to. It may even get, a little nastier than that, of like that real inner critic of like, you're not worthy, you're not good at anything. So what are those messages that you're saying to yourself in those moments where you're disappointed by not getting this thing done because of the lack of control? And when we can really pinpoint some of those themes of the way you speak to yourself, we can then work to shift it to a bit more of a kind, compassionate, productive inner voice. Because what I find is that a lot of us think that like being really harsh on ourselves will motivate us, but it actually just amplifies the guilt in the long run. And I'll often say to people, like, what you just said to yourself, would you ever say to a friend? Right? So if I was telling you, the things that you were telling yourself about beating yourself up last night about not getting it done, you would be like, that's so mean. Like, why, you would never speak to a friend that way.
I would never speak to a friend the way I speak to myself. I would be like, I would have like pep talked you. I've been like, Leah, you are an amazing social worker. Your clients love you to death. Just because you didn't get 2 hours of work done last night is not going to change your trajectory. Like, you are on an amazing, like I would be your cheerleader. Like,
exactly.
but it's such a good reminder. Like, I feel we do this so often. We talk so badly to ourselves. And it's not because I'm not like us. I'm not a self-sabotager. I'm pretty confident. Like, me. I really I take ownership of my day. Like, I take ownership of like my choices, and I'm pretty resilient. And yet I just beat myself up for not doing what I planned out to do yesterday in terms of work.
Yeah. And that's the catch, right? Like, that's where you want to notice in those times how you're actually speaking to yourself impacts you so much. And the good news is, if you're able to be like my cheerleader or someone else's cheerleader, you can access exactly as you said. Just because you didn't get that 2 hours of work done doesn't swing to the other end of just the spectrum and mean like you're a failure or you're not good at your job. And you can rationally, logically see that for someone else. But when we're dealing with it internally, the emotional aspect takes over. So it's kind of a helpful catch to be like, well, what am I saying to myself? And if I wouldn't say that to a friend, I'm not going to bully myself that way. And it takes practice. Like, it's really hard to shift that. But yeah, that's one tip that I think can be helpful.
Yeah. Oh my God, this is so good. There's so many juicy tips already. Okay. I want to ask you about, because we talk about this a lot too. And I want people to like hear what you have to say about this, because it's on a lot of people's minds. It's on people talk about this from a lot of different angles and perspectives of this title of working mom versus working dad. And like, you never hear the term working dad. What is that? Like, of course dad's working. And this word working mom is such like it can be like empowering and incredible. It's also triggering for some people. Some people don't understand it. Like, why are we getting the label and the men are not? And I want to know how we can like unpack this term and why it is so important. Because I know for me, from my perspective, it is a different label. Like we are doing different things in both as a parent. We're taking on more responsibility usually as a parent, and especially as a new mom. We just have a lot more to do, like physically, emotionally. Um, and it is different when we're working. So I want to understand it how we can unpack it from your lens.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. It's definitely layered and complex. And as you said, people have different opinions on it. I think one of the major things is that there just are still, stereotypical gender role issues coming to play here, right? Like, and also a lot of, I would say, some internalized misogyny for some women, where depending on how you grew up, what you saw your own mother doing, that sort of thing, as you said, despite things progressing quite a bit, there's still a long way to go in terms of, gender equality. And so, as you put, like, it is a lot of responsibility because in a lot of homes, there's tons of responsibility on the mother if it's, a 2-parent household, where there's kind of this expectation that she might take on more of the childcare responsibilities, more of the household responsibilities, all of the mental load stuff that we can get into. And as you said, no one really uses the term working dad. As we've talked about, no one bats an eye if your husband has to go on a business trip. But if you or I were to, take a week for a work trip, everyone's like, oh my God, like, is he going to be okay? Like, how can we help? Whereas like, if we're alone with the kids, it's like, no one really, everyone just
You're on
assumes
your
we're
own,
capable.
mom. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's a lot to unpack there, but as you said, I think it is a lot to juggle. And it sounds like you identify with the term because it's capturing that for you of like that huge responsibility of working on a business, growing your business and being a mom. And where I think what I mean by the internalized misogyny is that sometimes we will take on more just because we've been conditioned to expect that that's what's required of us. So, and we ourselves have to actively challenge that too. Of course, our partners, it's not to say that our partners can't step up and realize these things too, but I think it's important, again, to reflect on our role in it and be like, okay, well, like, I'm always the one. This is something me and my partner have talked about of like, I'm always the one. If my child's sick, I'm the one to stay home with him. And
why?
Exactly. So it's something that when he started going to daycare, that's just the way it was. He's a lawyer. He works downtown in an office. I'm self-employed as a therapist. I work from home. It's easier for me to, as you said, with, certain things, it's easier for me to just, cancel my clients and stay home because I'm not reporting to someone else. But I think it's more than that. When I really pause and reflect on it, I feel as the mom, I should be taking care of my baby when he's sick.
Mm-hmm.
And I would feel guilty too if my partner was the one, taking it. It's not to say that we should split it equally, right? It just shouldn't always be on me. But the reason I bring that example up is because I think we avoided maybe having some of those conversations because we just assumed that that would be the responsibility I had because of some of those internalized beliefs.
Okay, so how do we get past that? Because I agree. I think peeling back that layer, you're like, I'm the mom, so I'm going to do it. And, I know how to take care of my kid and I have maybe more flexibility if that's the case, which it is in ours. Like, how do we move past that way of thinking, and also like remove the guilt?
Yeah. So I think it's hard to remove the guilt. I often joke with my clients, like, I wish I had a magic wand for guilt because it would help so much. But unfortunately, I don't.
One.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'd probably use it about 3,000 times a day, though. So it would probably lose power after a week.
Exactly. But it's a good question. And I think the first thing is to just talk through it with your partner, right? Of like, maybe the partner, actually doesn't have that flexibility and can't do it, but there's something else they could do to take it off your, load. But the thing I think about addressing that is that, we want to be honest with like, hang on, I just do this automatically. Another example is like, I'm always packing the daycare bag or.
Yeah, we were just talking about this at dinner. We both always pack the daycare bag. It's like.
Yeah. And our husbands are very capable. And it's not that they don't want to help.
For the record, just for everyone to understand here, we have very hands-on partners. They are both incredible.
We're very lucky.
They're amazing. They're so hands-on. Like, I am so grateful, like, that he is even receptive to me badgering him this morning about morning routine and how can we fix it and be more collaborative, because he does do a lot of drop-offs in the morning. There's tons of dads actually at our daycare. Our kids go to the same daycare. So there are tons of dads there. Like, there are a lot of hands-on dads, but there's still that like control of like, well, I know how to pack her diaper bag and I know what she needs for this play date. And I'm going to, like that kind of stuff. It's hard to get over that hump. And you're right. It's not just like it's a deeper layer.
Yeah. And it's automatic because even as we were just saying that, I took that step back and I was like, hang on a second. I'm just like, we're very lucky. And it's like, why should we be lucky to have, it's true. Unfortunately, a lot of women maybe don't have a partner or maybe a partner that's not super supportive. And I can feel grateful for that. But even that phrase of like, I feel lucky. It's like, yeah, they should be an equal parent. Or what the term hands-on dad, no one says hands-on mom. Right.
I say that too. I said he's a hands-on dad.
Yeah. So even as we're talking about, like I do this, it's so much ingrained, right? It's how we grew up. It's what we've seen on TV and in movies growing up. And so the guilt, to loop back to that question, what I try to do is shift the responsibility and the blame and the guilt onto those societal standards of like, it's not on my shoulders, right? Like we both decided to have this child together. We both have committed to sharing responsibility. It's never going to be tit for tat equality. Brene Brown has a really good bit on that of like, with your partner coming home and saying things like, I'm at like a 20 out of 100. And your partner will be like, okay, like I got you. I'll pick up the slack. So it's all about that communication. But where we can recognize where we're just like slipping into these roles because that's what we've been conditioned to do, and taking that step back and taking stock of, just like we said at the beginning, right? Of like, treat it like work responsibilities where you can list things out. There's a really great book and account on Instagram called Fair Play Life. That goes into this a lot of like listing out all the different responsibilities, and really discussing with your partner what's doable, playing on each other's strengths, just like you would in a work environment. Breaking it down, assigning tasks, assigning responsibilities so that these automatic things that cause that burnout, that cause exhaustion of like, I'm always doing morning routine. I'm always doing this. It's like, well, let's break it down and assign it so we both feel it's manageable instead of one person always taking on more.
I feel like this is like the therapy session I needed after my like hard morning. Like This is actually a live therapy session for everyone
She's
listening.
consenting to it being broadcast, everyone.
I'm consenting for the live therapy session. No, it's true. Listen, it's like what we said earlier. It's almost like bringing all of those tools and techniques that you use in your work environment. Like you would never talk to an employee or like I have a co-founder, like Vic and I, when we have these meetings, like they're so structured. It's like, this is how I'm feeling, less sandwiching, all of that stuff, getting to like all of those great conclusions, moving forward. And at home, it just seems like we need to bring those tools into the house.
Yes, because you just go on autopilot and you get into these routines that, as you said, with the morning routine example, it's causing some level of burnout and you're feeling exhausted by it. And so it's like, this is an issue. Let's troubleshoot it. Let's talk about what would be doable and recognize some of those internalized messages of like, I'm the mom, I need to do this. And if I don't do this, I'm going to feel guilty. And again, that shift of like, well, it's actually society that just tells me I need to do this. I'm going to shift that guilt of like, that's wrong because we're both functioning adults. We can both contribute in different ways. I don't need to constantly take more on to prove that I'm a good mother. So I think that's maybe an element too of the guilt.
No, it's so good. It's so good. And even the other day I said, you're so right. I'm thinking about how I'm talking about these things now. The other day I said, I'm so lucky. I said the word, I am lucky because my dad is such a hands-on grandfather because he changes diapers and people are like shocked. They're like, that's so nice. I'm like, and then I think about it. I'm like, is it like, because I grew up with right.
I know. Yeah, it's hard not to.
I grew up with a great parent who changed diapers, and apparently that wasn't a thing. Like a lot of dads weren't changing diapers; it was on the mom. So it's a really good reminder to think about how we're talking about these things and realize, okay, it's not just me; it's society, and it's beyond, and I can recognize it and shift my thinking based on that.
Totally. Because we think we're progressive, right? Like we think but then you stop and you're like, hang on a second, like I still have these beliefs and
we are progressive, okay? We're
getting there.
We're getting there. No, you're right. They're internal. They're society. There's a lot of things to unpack. Anyway, I could talk to you about this for a million years, as you know. And another topic that we were talking about dinner, which I want to get into and going back to boundaries is, like, I don't even think we finished your 4 steps of boundaries. Can we go back there, please?
Sure. Yeah. I think we got to most of them.
Did we? Okay. Because I find that one of the big boundaries that you and I talk about too is just like, everyone wants to see your kid, right? Like your parents, your in-laws, managing all of that. And as you know, and for those of you listening who don't know, I have divorced parents. My husband has divorced parents. So it's like, we can't even get around to everyone in one weekend because it's just too hectic. So and then I feel bad about not sharing my kid and letting them see their grandparent. So how do you create boundaries around that? Because I find it really, really challenging. And I know you do too. So.
Yeah, so challenging. Something I'm actively working on right now. Love you, mom and dad and my in-laws, but
we won't name names.
Yeah.
And we love you all, but like you all fucking suck sometimes. Straight up. You make our lives really difficult. And we love you. And you also, like the two things, you make our lives amazing and they are so helpful and we would be nothing without them. And you also make us crazy.
Exactly.
Holding these two beliefs at the same time. Yeah.
And that's it of like, sometimes you realize like you need to protect some of that downtime or whatnot. And I hear what you're saying, especially for you, you're pulled in so many different directions. So if we go, maybe we'll go like really practically through the steps of that example. So the first step is stating what you're feeling, labeling the behaviors or actions that make you feel that way, and then expressing understanding and empathy for the other person's position, and then stating your need. So if we go through those 4 steps, you might say to like one of the grandparents says, "Hey, are you guys coming over this afternoon?" Or something like that. "We really want to see your daughter." And you say, "I'm feeling really tired from a really long week." Let's say they, I don't know if this is the case, but they've been like asking you, and, it's been hard for you to say no. So you're saying, I'm feeling really tired because I've had a really long week. When you're continuing to ask me that question, I'm feeling really pressured because I really am needing some rest. I understand that you really want to see her and that it really makes your weekend when you get to see her. And I do want to make sure that we're prioritizing that next weekend that you get to see her. So you're expressing that empathy for their position. And this weekend, I think we need to just stay home and rest because we're feeling really tired because she didn't sleep last night or whatever it is. So you're stating your need. And it might be if you have really persistent, messages, or you say something like that and you put the boundary in and it's not respected, right? Like you get that pushback. Because I think sometimes we could say like the perfect script of putting in the boundary and someone's not going to respect it. So let's say you say all of that and they say, "Oh, it's been so long. We haven't seen her." And it tugs at your guilt, right? Of like, "Oh, like I do want to make them happy. I don't want to disappoint them." Exactly. So if they say something like that, the key piece here is it doesn't make your need for that rest wrong, or it doesn't make your boundary of staying home wrong. They can have their feelings about it. It's not your responsibility. That's the people-pleasing piece. It's not your responsibility to manage their disappointment around not seeing your daughter. You don't have to fix that for them by taking her and abandoning your boundary.
It's not your responsibility. That is like the thing that we need to remember as working moms. Like you put in the boundary and you've done your piece, and now their reaction, not your problem.
Yeah, exactly. You deal with your emotions and disappointment with things all the time, right? And so we have this need, like as people pleasers, and this is something I'm working on all the time too, of like when someone says something like that, I feel really bad. I feel that guilt. So I switch my boundary and I'll give in often. And I'm like, okay, like we'll just go do it. Because I wanted to avoid the other person's disappointment and I wanted to avoid that feeling of guilt. But what happens is over time, another way of describing that people pleasing is like self-abandonment. And it sounds kind of harsh, but you really are. You're like, I'm just going to abandon the need that I had for rest in that moment to prioritize someone else's emotions. And that teaches people how they can treat you over time too. So
totally. Yeah, because it just keeps getting repeated because they know that they can get what they want if they ask enough times.
Yeah. So it's separating.
That's really hard.
Out. Yeah.
Ooh, deep shit.
It's hard. It's tricky.
Yeah, like I think in theory, I think the biggest thing for me just with this whole chat is just like recognizing and acknowledging what I'm doing. And I think like it's just so easy to be like, oh, my in-laws have been asking this thing for so long. And it's like, they can keep doing that, but I can create the boundary and say what I need. And then I need to take my hands away from it and not get too involved in how they're reacting to it. And it's like the same thing with business. I do that too. Like, even just like laying someone off, like, something that like we're kind of talking through and restructuring our whole business and how we're going to like bring new people on. And it's just like, we have to like do that as a business all the time and like quote unquote disappoint people. But once you do it, A, you feel better because you're doing the right thing for your business. And B, however they react is however they react. You're not going to like, you would never call someone that you fired after a few weeks being like, hey, how are you feeling? I'm so sore. Like, you just do it. And I feel like it's again, like, I feel like the overarching theme is like bringing those practices into your home life and putting those boundaries in. But yes, much easier said than done. And we both struggle with it. I call us recovering people pleasers because we're not people pleasers anymore. And we're just still in recovery.
Yeah, we're trying, right? And that, exactly as you said, it's separating so much of like our own distress in that is that you're taking on someone else's reaction. So if you can take that step back and separate it, again, two things can be true at once. The theme of like, you can feel bad for disappointing your in-laws. You can feel bad for letting someone go. It doesn't mean like, I think sometimes we think it means like swinging to the other end of the spectrum and being this like cold-hearted, like take no shit. This is what I'm doing. It's not that. Like, that's what I have a fear of like kind of swinging to that other end. Cause I do care about people's feelings, obviously. But it doesn't have to be that way. Like, there's a middle ground where you can state what you need, value that, be really direct and still care about someone's position without taking it on and like feeling responsible for their emotional reaction to something you did or said.
So powerful.
Yeah.
So powerful. I love it. Well, if you're looking for your own therapy session, you can book with Leah. I'll put it in the show notes or something. She's not allowed to be my therapist because we're friends. So I'm very disappointed in that, but we do help each other out and therapize with each other. So I'm very grateful for that. And I'm so grateful to have you in my life. You're like, I know that you struggle with a lot of these things too. And I just love how like honest you are about it. And I think that's like really what makes you so special. And you have to check out Leah's workbooks. They're so good. We'll also link it from Etsy just to like work on some of these things. Can you just tell us really, really quickly about the workbook?
Yeah, so I kind of compiled a bunch of these things. I have one self-care focused workbook and then one workbook focused more on people pleasing, and then a bunch of other handouts and reflection prompts for some of these questions that we've been exploring. The self-care one is really to take that step back and figure out how you can prioritize that, because as we said, there's so many competing priorities. And so it just helps you lay out that plan. And most importantly, like, I think we can all see these like perfect idealized routines, but like, what are the barriers for me in actually like implementing some of these things? So that one can help with that. But yeah, feel free to check them out.
They are really amazing. Okay, I have a few really fun questions for you to wrap up.
Sure.
Okay, ready? Okay. So, what is one thing you would tell your pre-kid self about being an ambitious working mom? Like, what would you tell prior Leah, non-mom Leah, about being an ambitious working mom?
That's a good one. I think I would say it's really hard, but it's also so rewarding to feel like you can do it. And I think one of the most rewarding things for me, I've been back working now for a little over a year. And at first it was so tough, but I think I would just say how empowering it feels to like, get back into things. And, while it comes with so many challenges, it does feel very empowering when you do get a lot done and you can juggle it all. Some days I always say like, some days you feel like crap. Some days you feel like superwoman. But I think, that it's all worth it. And it's kind of cool to see how lessons from being a mom and like personal struggles that you go through can influence your work too. So for me, I think I would say it's a wild ride, but it's worth it.
It is. It is a wild ride, and it is definitely worth it. What advice would you give to women who are considering starting a family while pursuing a demanding career?
That's a good one. I guess I would just say there's so much information out there about parenting and parenting strategies and different we get information overload as moms. But to kind of be a mom and go back into work, I think really working on your own emotion regulation is a huge piece of you have to be able to juggle a screaming toddler, having a tantrum, your morning's all blown up, your emotions are escalated, you finally drop them off, and then you have to come back and work or go to work. And, so just that piece of advice is there's so much out there. There's so much information around different parenting things. At the core of it, from a therapist perspective, it's all about your own emotion regulation and being able to come back down after a tantrum to then shift gears into work and taking that time to transition.
What's something you can tell people who have thought about doing therapy and haven't pulled the trigger yet?
I think if they've never had any therapy experience, there's a lot of misconceptions, and it's really not that scary, right? Just as we're talking, it's really a conversation at its core. And I think sometimes the misconception is you're going to be analyzed, or they're going to try to poke at things that you don't want to talk about. And good therapy will really meet the person where they're at. So if there's something you're really wanting support with, but you're I don't want to go there, or I don't want to dig up childhood stuff, you're allowed, speaking of boundaries, you're allowed to say what you want to work on and what you're not comfortable on, what you're not comfortable talking about, and kind of, I would say reflect on kind of what's holding you back or what maybe you're worried about. But I would just say that it's not scary. I think that, it's a lot easier than it maybe seems from movies or TVs if you've never had that experience.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much. This was so great. I feel like there are so many golden nuggets in there, and so many people are feeling how I'm feeling, which is honestly just validated. My emotions, my feelings, all the shit that's going on is just validated. So thank you. And I'm I really want to be more cognizant of the way I'm talking about things and how I can regulate my emotions after the tantrum and after the hard fight or after the work. It's all so integrated. So
yeah,
these were all such great reminders. So
good. I'm glad.
I love you. Thank you. So great.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find you if they are I want to book a session?
Sure. So you can just go to my website, www.leahmarks.com, and you can register and book in a free consult, and we can see if we'd be a good fit to work together.
She's the best. The one and only. You're so modest. I love it too. Thank you. This was amazing.
Love you, Danny. Thanks for having me.
Love you. Thanks, girl. Love today's episode? Subscribe and share with another amazing woman, and follow me at the Double Shift Podcast for more. Do you know someone that would be an incredible guest? Head to DannyTeagan.com. Have a beautiful rest of your